In 1933, the film world was only just 6 years into having sound, so to introduce a giant monster in a made-up land at the highest quality to appease moviegoers was a humongous task. However, the talents of many and the drive and perseverance of a few brought us one of the all-time classic monster films, Behind the Blood, King Kong, 1933. Hey everybody, welcome to Behind the Blood, King Kong. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe, hit the notifications tab, and after the show, don't forget to comment below. Alright, here we go. Marion C. Cooper, the brainchild behind King Kong. He actually first conceived the idea of a giant ape on top of the world's tallest building fighting off airplanes. From there, he conceived of the story backwards. The miniature King Kong model was made out of a metal mesh skeleton. From there, rubber and foam were used for muscular structure, and then rabbit fur for the fur of King Kong. Creating King Kong was a magical feat, and we're going to get into a lot of that as the show goes on. To start off with his roar, it was a combination of a lion's roar and a tiger's roar played backwards and in slow motion. King Kong had the benefit of stealing lots of jungle sets from previous films that had already been shut down or completed. David O. Selznick left RKO Studios halfway through the production of King Kong, but his last act was probably one of his most crucial, changing the working title of Kong to the now King Kong. Stop-motion pioneer and genius Willis H. O'Brien used many dinosaurs in his Lost World film in 1925. He was also creating a whole bunch for an unreleased film called Creation. Marion C. Cooper sold RKO executives in New York on the idea of King Kong using Willis H. O'Brien's previous sequences for Creation. The studio executives had never seen anything like that and instantly greenlit the project. Marion C. Cooper's dream project was ready to go. The success of King Kong would be attributed to saving RKO from bankruptcy. Almost all the dinosaurs and creatures in Kong were from the unreleased film Creation, except the main star, King Kong. The actual design of King Kong is actually kind of complex. Cooper wanted more ape and Willis O'Brien was opting for more man. Most of the creatures in King Kong were miniature armatures made out of dental dam. However, due to the lights and the length of the production, many of them got really damaged, including King Kong's face. And you can actually see it in the production. While we talked about Marion C. Cooper, his partner in crime on the film was Ernest Schoedsack. The two of them were responsible for bringing King Kong to life. Joining Fay Wray in the casting was Robert Armstrong, who played Carl Denham in King Kong. He and Fay Wray were in the Marion C. Cooper film, The Most Dangerous Game. The character of Carl Denham was really based on Marion C. Cooper and his crazy adventures when he was younger. Robert Armstrong and Marion C. Cooper actually died one day apart, April 20th and April 21st, 1973. During the production of King Kong, Willis O'Brien actually gave false information about how he created his creatures. He didn't want anybody else to know. He wanted his secrets to be him, and all sets were very closed. Francis Lee was considered for the role of Aunt Darrell, and Jean Harlow actually turned the role down. King Kong technically has 3 writers. Ernest Schoedsack's wife, Ruth Rose, is credited for writing the dialogue of the film. James Creelman also wrote King Kong. While Ernest Wallace got a credit for writing King Kong, Marion C. Cooper is adamant that he didn't write one word. Marion C. Cooper was larger than life, as explained by many people. He was an adventurer, he was an executive, a filmmaker, and more. It was actually mentioned that Carl Denham in King Kong is Marion C. Cooper. They actually even kind of look alike. Max Steiner's score was 70 minutes of original music, and he was the very first ever to score an entire film. Each of the main characters in King Kong has their own theme music. There is no music in the film until they reach Skull Island. And Murray Spivak was the genius sound effects man. When it came time to casting King Kong, Marion C. Cooper positioned it to Fay Wray as you will be working with the tallest, darkest, leading man in Hollywood. She thought it was Cary Grant. Production for King Kong started in January of 1932. The sets of King Kong actually became the primary focus of the budget. Funny story, back in the day, Cooper was a wrestler and Willis O'Brien was an amateur boxer. And you could really see this in the fight between the T-Rex and King Kong. There's a lot of jabs and hip tosses before a final piggyback ride and takedown. It's actually kind of funny to watch. Remembering that King Kong is completely stop motion animation, one of the flaws that is throughout the whole film is you see King Kong's fur move. And that is from the animators who would stop every scene and move King Kong a little bit. What they would do is they would brush him to make sure that all the indentations of fingers were gone. But at the end of the day, it was impossible in the schedule that they had to make it perfect. That being said, there's a charm to it, and sometimes it kind of looks like the wind is blowing through his hair, but we're being picky if we're gonna critique that. For the scenes where Anne is in King Kong's hand, it was actually just a severed forearm, and she would be laying in the hand and it would be closed automatically and then lifted 10 feet into the air where they would do the scene. However, the more she struggled, the looser the grip would become. Fay Wray said that the actual terror in her face was 100% real. She would have to signal to Marion C. Cooper when she felt unsafe or she was ready to end the take. Scenes cut over the years of King Kong's release and re-release include Kong chewing on the natives, 2 scenes where Kong is squashing a native with his giant foot, the Brontosaurus biting and throwing the man into the water, Kong putting a New Yorker in his mouth and throwing him down to the ground, scene where Kong climbs up a New York building, pulls out a sleeping woman, gives her a once-over, realizes it's not his girl, and throws her to her death, as well as Fay Wray's character and Darryl being stripped by King Kong. At one point, all those scenes were taken out of the film. However, they rejoined the film happily in 1971. Willis H. O'Brien hated the shots featuring just the head bust of King Kong, and he ain't wrong. They were pretty laughable. It took 7 weeks to shoot the T-Rex King Kong fight sequence. A typical King Kong jungle setup would feature the following: glass with green borders painted on, a table in front with green foliage, then a built-in miniature jungle with a matte painting in behind it all. The whole thing would be about 6 to 12 feet deep and added a texture to the jungle scenes. Nothing like that had ever been done before. In fact, the technology advancements in this film were too numerous to mention. The buzz was going around Hollywood that King Kong was going to be a monster hit. That being said, MGM offered RKO just over $1 million for the rights, which was about $400,000 over the negative cost. RKO was quick to say to that offer, and it was a good move because King Kong went on to obliterate the box office. Most sequences had to be shot non-stop. Oftentimes, 20-hour workdays were required. There would be times where greenery would start wilting in the lights, and there would be other times where flowers would be blooming in the middle of scenes. Before commencing, all the lights on the soundstage had to be changed to avoid flickering, and no one was even allowed into the set because they were worried about wind moving the foliage. The 18-inch models of King Kong, built by Willis O'Brien's assistant Marcel Delgado, were the first animation models with metal skeletons and joints. Instead of the jerky movement of models built on wood, Kong moved much more smoothly, creating a greater illusion of life. Delgado covered the skeleton with rubber muscles that actually expanded and contracted when they were moved. The creature was then covered with rubber and latex skin and, as mentioned before, rabbit fur for the final touch. Okay, this is cool. There was more than one Kong model used for the film, and there's actually considerable differences between the Kong on Skull Island and the Kong in New York City. Have you ever noticed the difference? The Skull Island Kong face was a little bit longer than the one used in New York City. Filmmakers thought the Skull Island face was a little bit too human. Personally, I kind of like that one better. But this ain't Rankenstein, so I'll keep my opinions to myself. The Brontosaurus sound effect was achieved by grunting into a double-chambered gourd. while the T-Rex hissing was achieved by a puma and a high compression air. So, along with the miniatures made for King Kong, also were giant hands, some feet, and the bust. Close-up footage of the Empire State Building was added to the film after its re-release in 1952. The scene where King Kong grabs the first plane and tosses it off the side of the building, we see a pristine picture of the Empire State Building as it existed in the 50s. But if you compare it to the footage shot in the 1930s, it actually looks way newer, way cleaner. But hey, suspension of disbelief, and how many people really notice that. Most of the dialogue between Captain Englehorn and the Chief appears to be complete gibberish, but when the Chief is understood to be wanting to buy Darren from them, and Captain Englehorn says, "Tida, Tida," that is Malay for no, no. And that all makes sense since in the film we know that they are near the coast of Sumatra. Originally, there was supposed to be a shot of King Kong falling from the Empire State Building from an overhead angle, and this was accomplished by adding King Kong in post. However, with the limited technology that they had, every time Kong passed a dark ledge, you can actually see through him, so therefore it was cut in post, and it only survives in pictures and in some footage today. Kong creators Marion C. Cooper and Ernest Schoedsack actually flew one of the planes that shot down Kong. Their rationale was, we brought him to life, we should kill the son of a bitch ourselves. One of the common mistakes is when King Kong brings Darren to the cave and gets into a fight. A lot of people think it was a snake, but it was actually a plesiosaur, and you can actually see the fins of the plesiosaur, in contrast to a snake, which would have been just a one serpentine body. In order to keep King Kong magical, very little behind the scenes footage was shot, which is kind of a bummer nowadays. The mysterious spider pit sequence. For years, there was no thought about it, but then in the 1960s, famous magazine Monsters of Filmland pictured a big giant spider from the set of King Kong. From that, imaginations were sparked and the spider sequence was alive. Did it actually exist? Common theory is that it slowed down the film, so it was taken out. But no one knows if it was taken out before it was shot or after it was shot. Regardless, the footage is lost. There is a hunt for it, and many fans and many filmmakers alike would love to get their hands on it, but it hasn't surfaced to this day. It doesn't mean it never existed, it just means that we just don't know. Again, Peter Jackson in his DVD release of King Kong actually refilms what he thinks happened in that sequence. Although it's not the real thing, it is as close as you can get, and I implore fans to go and check it out. Also surfacing was a picture of an Archaeotherium, which was later turned into a Stachosaur. The idea was when King Kong had the men cornered on the log, the reason why they couldn't turn back was because that creature was there waiting for them. Again, Peter Jackson does a brilliant job of recreating that sequence. You have to check it out. King Kong was the only film to play simultaneously in the two biggest theaters in New York City, the Roxy and Radio City Music Hall, and it sold both venues out for 10 days, which is approximately 10,000 seats. King Kong took 50 weeks to shoot and post. It opened up on March 2nd, 1933, Easter Sunday in London, and 12,000 people had to be turned away. Authors Daniel Loxton and Donald Prothero argue in their 2013 book Abominable that King Kong's release was responsible for the sightings of Loch Ness Monster, which coincidentally happened to occur about 6 months after the release. The famous photo that we all know of Nessie does kind of resemble the Brontosaurus used in the making of King Kong. I don't know. AFI ranks King Kong as number 41 of the greatest films ever made. There is a color version of King Kong out there, but I've never seen it, nor do I ever want to. It is the first big monster film ever made. King Kong, along with Laurel and Hardy movies and Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, were supposedly Adolf Hitler's favorite films. Marion C. Cooper originally designed King Kong to be shown in Yankee Stadium rather than the theater that he was displayed in. This ended up being too big of a production. However, Willis O'Brien drew a sketch of King Kong busting through Yankee Stadium, which would have been pretty cool. King Kong movie promo posters had him at 50 feet tall, when in reality he was closer to 19 feet tall in the jungle and about 25 feet tall in New York City. The film actually had a lot of titles before it settled on King Kong. The Beast, the Ape, the Beast Ape, the Eighth Wonder, and of course, Kong. The original draft of King Kong had him being struck down by lightning. According to the film's editor, Archie Marshak, the film's train sequence was a last-minute throw-in. It was brought in there because Marion C. Cooper was a superstitious man. It finished at 13 reels, and he did not like that. Despite what we all come to know now, and including the 2017 film, as well as other King Kong films, there's no mention in the 1933 version that it's Skull Island. They say Skull Mountain, but there is no mention of Skull Island. In 1933, they paid $20 to see King Kong at that theater. Adjusted for inflation for 2019, you're talking a cool $387 to see King Kong. The film has a death count of approximately 40 people, which is ridiculously high for an old black and white film. Nowadays, like everything, the film gets an incredible amount of flack for being culturally insensitive with the natives and the way they acted and the way they dressed. But the bottom line is, this comes from people complaining about it being African-based. King Kong was not. It was off a fictitious island near Sumatra, which back then they did dress similar to the way the film depicts some of the characters. King Kong grossed approximately $10 million. It was released on March 2nd, 1933. The runtime, 1 hour, 40 minutes. Production budget, $672,000. It was not rated. $10 million today would be $193 million, $624,615. So, not bad. King Kong grossed $90,000 in its opening weekend, which was the biggest ever. Okay, well, it's been a long time since 1933, but how about some locations? The theater where the Eighth Wonder of the World was exhibited is at 665 West Jefferson Boulevard, Los Angeles, California. Most of Kong's scenes were at Culver Studios at 9336 Washington Boulevard. Jungle scenes were at 4730 Crystal Springs Drive. Kong's death, 20 West 34th Street, New York. Thanks for joining us for 1933's King Kong. Hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to comment below. Hit subscribe, hit the notifications tab, follow us on social media. Be good to us, we'll be good to you. Thank you very much. See you soon.